A majority of Trump voters and almost a majority of Biden voters want this country to split in two between red states and blue states. There's a lot of reasons for it. I mean, both sides view the other as evil liars, and independents seem to be mostly divided, but independents seem to be leaning more towards supporting the Republican side of things. Now, it's not necessarily about Democrat or Republican, but that's what people are viewing it as. The problem here is that there's no Mason-Dixon line. You can't just have blue states secede and red states secede because it would be a very strange map. Blue states aren't all touching each other. And not just that. Some people have said maybe the cities should secede. Yeah, but blue states are just big cities dominating their more conservative rural regions. And red states are, for the most part, the rural regions dominating their more Democrat, liberal urban centers. But regardless of what or how it could happen, I think it's happening. I have said it before. The republic has already fallen. Why? Well, there's no border. You've got migrants walking back and forth. A new report suggests that 60,000 more migrants are on their way to the border. And NBC says it could be upwards of 400,000 next month. If you have no border, you have no jurisdiction, you have no claim to a nation or a country or a county or a state for that matter. Now, that isn't necessarily indicative of a civil war or a divide between the two factions, but more and more of these polls are popping up and you can see the divide. Absolutely, people are gearing up for some very serious conflict. There's a story about a man throwing a Molotov cocktail into a DNC headquarters. I think it was a DNC headquarters. We'll get into that story. We got a story about a Boogaloo boy who went to Minnesota and fired rounds at a police station. The media tries claiming he was a far-right individual posing as Black Lives Matter. The dude was yelling justice for Floyd. Boogaloo boys are anti-government anarchist types, libertarian types, and they've marched with Black Lives Matter before. But the media needs to have this dichotomy. They can't accept that there's nuance in what's going on. And then we have a hate crime hoax. We have a lot of stories. We have a report now. Antifa violence isn't even being tracked because Antifa isn't considered a group. It's just considered potentially anarchist violence. You have these powerful individuals in the federal government saying the far right is dangerous and white supremacy is dangerous, and they don't even talk about the lower tier but more frequent Antifa terror affecting this country. We just had a story, I covered it in a previous segment, about Smith & Wesson leaving Massachusetts. Another sign of powerful institutions moving away. What's happening is that red states are more attractive to individuals who want freedom, and blue states are more attractive to people who want to be told what to do and how to do it. Whether you look, I'm not saying, you're free to live the way you want to live. But over time, people are self-segregating. People in California who can't stand the system put in place by Democrats and the Uniparty are moving to Texas. Texas is actually becoming more red only because of transplants who believe in this vision of Texas when native Texans are actually more Democrat. We're also seeing Miami go from blue to red. I mean, weird stuff is happening. And we've got more data suggesting people want this country to break apart. And I'm going to show you this. But we also have an interesting analysis piece about the idea of national divorce and why it's important. Because it would avoid violence. And it doesn't mean there can't be alliances. One of the biggest fears is that China would then take over. But if there are two different distinct nations, in fact, that could empower people in this country. Because then people are able to live the way they want to live. The Democrats can have their strict border controls for vaccine mandates. The Republicans can have all the guns in the world. And then there you go. Wouldn't that make people a bit happier, more productive? And then they can cooperate on national and global defense. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on all that, but let's read the news and see what's going on with this poll. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com, become a member to get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, as well as an ad-free experience as you browse the website. Plus, we are launching a new show today. It's actually already up on Spotify. iTunes takes a little bit longer. They have to approve of it. But for those that are members at timcast.com, you've already seen it. We already announced the other day the name of the show, and people have probably been able to find it. It's a fully produced mystery and paranormal true crime style podcast, investigative journalism. You'll want to check this out. That's going to be announced tonight. But don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this video right now with your friends and this show if you really do want to support our work. Let's read from Newsweek. Now, before I do, I might add, Newsweek, of course, is framing this as though it is the Trump supporters who are at fault, saying, Majority of Trump voters want to split the nation into red and blue halves. Yes. And 41% of Biden supporters want to do the same. Newsweek reports. A majority of Trump voters want to split the country into red and blue halves, according to a new poll conducted by the University of Virginia's Nonpartisan Center for Politics. Roughly 52% of people who voted for Republican former President Trump either somewhat agree or strongly agree that it's time to split the country, favoring that either red or blue states secede from the union, the poll found. Comparatively, 41% of people who voted for Joe Biden agree with the idea. Splitting the country would likely cause massive conflict. Maybe. There's an argument we'll get to, that might not actually be the case. In fact, many prominent modern thinkers say it would prevent conflict. No one from Texas wants to go to New York and fight anybody. But we don't like the fact that New Yorkers go to Congress and then try to impose laws on Texas. And people in Texas don't like that, and the people in New York aren't happy with people in Texas going to Congress. And it's reflected in the body politic. And the statements made by people like Bernie Sanders when he says 2 senators should not be able to hold this country hostage. And everyone's like, Bernie, can we remind you that there's 50 other Republican senators who are saying no, but they don't view you as part of their country. And I'll pull up that. Actually, let me just, I don't think I have this tweet from Bernie Sanders. Oh, I do have it. Here you go. Bernie Sanders said 2 senators cannot be allowed to defeat what 48 senators and 210 House members want. We must stand with the working families of our country. We must combat climate change. We must delay passing the infrastructure bill until we pass a strong reconciliation bill. 52 senators said, no, Bernie. 25 states still exist. This is how it manifests. Bernie Sanders doesn't care what you think in your state. He only cares about the 50 states where the Democrats have won. But guess what? West Virginia? Sorry, Bernie. West Virginia is a red state. And boy, howdy, it is the second most Trump supporting state in the country. So don't be surprised Manchin is saying no. Manchin may be a Democrat, but he won because people in West Virginia liked the guy, not because of his party. And I will tell you this, I strongly believe a Democrat will not win in West Virginia in the next election. They go on to say, when 11 southern states seceded from the Union in 1860, it marked the start of the U.S. Civil War. The resulting 4-year, 27-day battle ended with more than 498,000 soldier deaths, making it the country's deadliest conflict of all time, according to the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. Red and blue states refer to the states that vote Republican. We get that. Election maps show states as entirely red or blue to help viewers understand how many state electoral votes they have. However, some political thinkers reject the concept of red and blue states entirely. That's because all U.S. states actually contain Republican, Democratic, and other types of voters and non-voters as well. Traditional U.S. electoral maps not only illustrate polarization, they can exacerbate it. No state is strictly red or blue. They are shades of purple, according to the website Purple States of America. The website and others like it think that red and blue state maps focus too much on political disagreements, reinforcing partisan gridlock and social instability. Instead, purple states offer a visual example of overlapping commonalities. The rest of UVA's poll also focuses on commonalities between Trump and Biden voters. In the poll, similar majorities of both Biden and Trump voters express some distrust for voters, elected officials, and media sources that they associate with the other side. Both groups of voters also view the U.S. government system as one that's rigged to favor the wealthy and powerful, undermining each group's faith in the nation's representative democracy. The UVA's Center for Politics hopes that further research through its Project Home Fire initiative can identify policy and issue areas that both Biden and Trump voters care about. In doing so, the project seeks to discover specific pathways for voters on both sides to open their minds to mutually beneficial compromise that accrues to the bigger goal of preserving, protecting, and expanding America's universally representative democracy, the project's press release said. This poll is escalation. It was a couple of years ago. I think the number was in like the 20% or so, in the 30s. You have more information coming out showing that more and more people are saying enough, and rapidly too. So I think it's admirable to try and be like, we need to preserve this country and bring people together, but it ain't going to happen, my friends. I'll throw you back to this poll. We have this from dailyvoice.com. New poll reveals percentages of Americans who want to secede by region. But you need to understand this data, and you need to understand the nuance of it. I have talked about this before, but for those that are maybe missing this context, it's very important. We can see that they divide the country into 5 regions. You have the Pacific, the mountain region, the heartland, the South, and the Northeast. And they go on to show you which political faction favors secession to which degree. In the South, 66% of Republicans favor secession. A large portion of Democrats do as well. I believe the number is pretty small, but it looks around 50%. In the heartland, it's mostly the independents. I'm sorry. That's in the South. It's independent voters, not Democrats. Democrats don't favor secession. 50% of independents. In the heartland, 43% of independents, the plurality. Then you have Democrats in the Northeast at 39%, and the Pacific, 47% plurality. In the mountain region, 43%. Now, I tracked all of the states by population and percentage and party to figure out what this means. And normalizing for population and party, 37.2% of all people in the U.S. favor the U.S. breaking apart in some fashion. Now, what that means is, on average, 37.2% of each region favors breaking their region off. This is a huge number. In the American Revolution, it was a comparable amount that wanted independence, and it was a slightly smaller amount that were loyalist to the British government, and most people just said, I don't care, leave me alone. Those are the other numbers we're missing. How many are saying, I don't care, leave me alone? When you have numbers this large, and people just basically saying, yo, we need to break this up, it looks like we're driving in that direction. Empires don't last forever, and people have said they usually last 250 years or so. Now, the U.S. may be just about that old, but we weren't always an empire, so it's hard to know how much time we have left. And that being said, the Soviet Union only lasted around 69 years. The U.S. may actually break apart. Now, Bill Maher has that segment he talked about a while ago where he's like, it can't happen because the Mason-Dixon line would go through Nana's kitchen, because he doesn't know what a civil war is. And I know many of you may have heard me say it, but again, for those that haven't, because not everybody watches every video I do, the American Civil War was not a traditional civil war. You had sovereign states lining up against other sovereign states. It was just a war. That's what it was. It was just a war. Look at the Spanish Civil War. Look at other revolutions if you want to understand civil war. Insurgent pockets popping up in different areas of the country and factions fighting over control of that country. The federal government may fight to keep the union intact, but Democrats are going to fight to protect Democrat territory, Republicans will fight to protect Republican territory. And you know what'll happen? You'll basically have 3 factions where the Democrats are going to be like, we don't care about Texas. Let Texas do what it wants. Texas, I don't care about California. California, go away. And then you're going to have the federal government being like, no. In the end, if the federal government is the only thing trying to keep things together, I don't see it succeeding. With the American Civil War as we know it, the North was just straight up saying slavery is morally repugnant and we will invade to stop it. I think we all understand that. It was a war. Much like with World War II. What Nazi Germany was doing was horrible. Now, most people didn't know. I don't think we knew about the Holocaust until after the war, but we knew bad things were happening. We knew they were invading other countries and it needed to be stopped. There was a moral crisis where we said we must intervene. Not a big fan of intervention, mind you, but I can certainly understand World War II and the American Civil War. However, today we won't have that. There's no moral issue by which Democrats are going to want to invade Texas. They're just going to be like, do whatever you want. Fine, you plague rats, you maggots. And the Texans are going to be like, we don't care, do your thing. It's the federal government, but they will not have the power to do anything about it. And there are developments on this front, as well as evidence of crisis. Take a look at this. Lawmaker wants New Hampshire to declare independence. It's actually, I think, now around 5 or 6 lawmakers in New Hampshire. But the reality is, New Hampshire is the home of the Free State Project, which if you watched Timcast IRL, you heard all about several times. People moving to New Hampshire, and they pledge to just vote libertarian. And then there are people who track the politicians, say, are they actually for freedom? And what do? Repeal laws. They repealed a window tinting law. They're like, why not? Tint your windows all day and night. The Free Staters have tremendous power in New Hampshire, and more are going there by the minute. Now, will New Hampshire actually secede? I think if they remain on this track and everything we see happening in the U.S. continues, then yes. Yeah, they will. And what can the federal government do about it? Well, I think what we will see is soft secession. And what does that mean? It means that places like New Hampshire will just stop cooperating with the feds. People in New Hampshire won't be paying income taxes. They won't be abiding by federal law, DEA, ATF, etc. And the feds will have no power to actually do anything about it. The federal government does not have the level of officers to deal with states breaking away. 1.3 million people in New Hampshire. Imagine if all of them stopped paying taxes because they view themselves as independent, a soft secession. They would allow the feds to still operate their post offices and their roads and their military bases, saying, we don't care. You just won't enforce it on us because we don't comply. The feds know that they would lose if they tried to get involved in some kind of conflict with a state, so they would ignore it. This example was given to us by our guest the other night who mentioned the Amish. I didn't know this. They don't pay Social Security tax. They're exempt from a bunch of laws because they just absolutely refuse to comply. And if that's the case, and we're moving in this direction, it will happen. I want to stress Bernie Sanders' tweet as we move forward, saying that 2 senators cannot be allowed to defeat what 48 senators and 210 House members want. This is a really good example of how Bernie Sanders, the Democrats, don't care about the other half of this country. They say we're the majority, so there it is. 50 senators are saying no to you, Bernie. It's not 2. But this is the example. You need to understand when they say we don't care about you. We don't advocate for you. We don't believe in you. You're in the way. He's complaining that 2 senators who are Democrats don't blindly agree with him. Now let's talk about where this country is going when you have things like this. This is from NBC4 Washington. Man throws Molotov cocktail into Austin Democratic Party HQ. An arson investigation is underway in Austin after a man wearing an American flag bandana was caught on video throwing a Molotov cocktail into the Travis County Democratic Party headquarters on Wednesday. This is important to understand. When they say there would be conflict, what do you think happens to Texas if Texas secedes from the Union and Austin is overwhelmingly Democrat? The Democrats in Austin and in Dallas and these urban areas will call out to the federal government and say, they don't represent us. It's illegal. You can't secede. And they would demand federal assistance. Now, the feds may come in. The military may come in, the National Guard perhaps. But the National Guard who live in Texas would probably just adhere to the law of the governor and the political body of Texas, not to the federal government. I mean, remains to be seen, to be honest. But the Democrats are going to say, help. In which case the feds would come in and there would be serious internal conflict in that state. But what happens if like 5 or 6 states do it all at the exact same time? The federal government would not have the ability to do anything about it because you're not going to see blue states marching into red states. The one thing that may happen, however, is if blue states send their National Guard, which gets federalized, into the red states that are trying to secede, because the red states would not be seceding with a union, in which case the union can draw power from the blue states and then send them to the red states. If the Democrats in Austin say, Democrats help us, the Democrats will. So perhaps if there is a national divorce, you'll get chaos. I can certainly understand why it's happening. Take a look at these 2 stories. We have this from Post Millennial. Black woman charged after allegedly posing as white male and sending violent racist notes to neighbors. Hate crime hoaxes, they're a thing. Here's one. Texas man, 24, admits shooting at Minneapolis police station during riot. This is Black Lives Matter. He's a boogaloo boy. They're not pro-cop. They are not pro-government. And so the media is trying to make it seem like this guy's far right. I don't think it matters. I bring this example up to show you that people are actively trying to cause harm, be it through psychological manipulation or physical violence. We're at that point. It is happening. People say, oh, it can never happen here. It is happening now. Here you go. From the Daily Wire. Panama's foreign minister. We warned Biden about Haitian migrant crisis. 60,000 more are coming. We have no border. The people of Texas are getting fed up. The southern border counties are all voting Republican because they're demanding help to stop the crisis. And if the federal government won't do it, if Biden is actively calling for these people to come, and he did, he said, surge the border. Everyone wants to come, come. How long will these people sit back until they finally say no? But it's worse than you realize. According to a report from NBC, quote, as many as 400,000 migrants are heading to the U.S. border, NBC News reports. An unprecedented number, nearly doubling the stunning numbers we've seen in the last 2 months, which were at a 21-year high. Let me tell you what happens. California is a sanctuary state. They have broken federal law and the feds won't do anything about it. Okay, where's the income tax sanctuary? You think I'm kidding? What if New Hampshire declares income tax sanctuary? The feds do nothing. In many states, they've declared themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries, many counties. I think in Ohio, there's areas where the cops are instructed to arrest the ATF if they try and come in and enforce action. In Texas, they've announced they're going to make their own suppressors, and the feds can't do anything about it. The federal government's power is in disarray. It is collapsing. In California, they say immigration laws be damned, and the feds do nothing about it. The entire state. In fact, non-citizens can vote in some elections in California. So what do you think happens if Texas and New Hampshire say, no more income tax, we're an income tax sanctuary? Why not? What if Texas said, we are hereby an income tax sanctuary, no one has to pay it anymore, and the state will be taxing you all at 5% more. So the average person sees their taxes drop substantially. Texas absorbs all that money and then gets to do what they want with it. What are the feds going to do to the state? Nothing. That's it, nothing. Because California has already proven the emperor has no clothes. If you think the republic stands, but California can straight up say, we will not follow federal law, which it's been going on for some time, I don't know what to tell you. And more states are absolutely moving in this direction. Take a look at this story from Jason Bailey. Ochsner Health in LA is now mandating vaccine for spouses of employees. If your spouse is on your insurance and does not get vaccinated, they'll be imposing a $100 per pay period fee. What started as a $100 incentive to get the jab has now turned into a recurring tax. Let me repeat that for you. If your wife or husband who doesn't work there is unvaccinated, they're going to fine you $100 per pay period. And that's massive. I mean, I don't know how much these people are making per hour, but if they're making $20 an hour, I mean, that's taking away 5 hours of labor. That's a lot of money, unless your spouse is vaccinated. I highlight this just to show you what is driving massive divide in this country. Florida. Ron DeSantis straight up said, we will not be doing this. People have a right to choose. I believe in a right to choose. That's why I moved to West Virginia. But in blue states, they believe they have the right to impose even on your families. And the Democrats vote for this. I think the problem with libertarians and conservatives is that they genuinely think other people want freedom. They don't. You need to understand and empathize with other people. They assume that someone in California genuinely wants to be free and opposes the government. Time and time again, the people of California prove to us they love it. They want to be told what to do. They revel in it. And they're allowed to feel that way and be that way, in which case, if you don't like it and you live in California, it's time to leave. Texas, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Iowa, New Hampshire, West Virginia, there are many places. And now with remote working and with Starlink coming out, there's an opportunity to basically live anywhere and not have to deal with this stuff. Now, ultimately, I think in the end, what's happening is hyperpolarization is resulting in people separating each other. California has just announced a vaccine mandate for K through 12 students in public and private schools. That's amazing. 5-year-olds, K through 12. That means 5-year-olds. Okay. I'm not going to opine on vaccines. I'm going to talk about the policy. And what that means is if you are someone who wants the decision to be made for your family and you want long-term data, California says no. Do what you want. I say you take your kids and you go somewhere that represents your values, because I think your kids are the most important thing. But if you agree with it, then you should be happy. The divide is happening. I want to throw it now on the way out to this article by David Riaboy. We've had him on the IRL podcast. He says, national divorce is expensive, but it's worth every penny. The national divorce discussion prepares the ground for crucial thinking about what comes next in America as the country grows even more divided, bitter, and angry. David says, for the last several years, I've been among a handful of commentators, along with good friends, Michael Malice, Jesse Kelly, Michael Anton, and others, talking about the possibility or desirability of a national divorce, the political separation of blue and red America, or to get more specific and inflammatory, the breakup or dissolution of the United States. This week, my friend Carol Markowitz has written a typically thoughtful piece on the subject of the New York Post and concludes that as much as many people long for some kind of separation that would solve the many real problems of America's current disunion, it's not a solution that's currently feasible. As with any breakup or divorce, even if we had a popular consensus for a national divorce in principle, there are all kinds of details and massive, very thorny ones, like who gets which territories, populations, industries, or nuclear weapons caches. That could cause tumultuous and potentially violent negotiations. All these points of contention are very real and shouldn't be dismissed out of hand. They're not going anywhere. The seriousness of these issues and their daunting solutions are meant to prove that the breakup of the U.S. will always be an impossibility. But that's not right. National divorce or some other more tragic and chaotic outcome won't be impossible forever. Despite heaping dollops of patriotic propaganda, which admittedly is essential to maintenance of the citizens' faith in the regime, one day the U.S. will end. History teaches us that regimes, like all human creations, rise and fall. And world-bestriding empires fall harder, faster, and more surely than that. Admitting that is a possibility isn't as accurate as understanding it as a certainty. Yet the timeline is hazy, but it's coming. As one approaches the crisis and contempt between America's build beyond what is currently imaginable, those thorny points of contention, heretofore enough to reduce national divorce to a laugh line, become real objects of debate and deliberative thought. There is a price, for example, at which the hard work of pulling oil from the ground in a place is so prohibitively expensive, even discussing it seems foolish. However, when circumstances change, maybe global supply wanes and prices rise dramatically, areas believed to be too costly for drilling suddenly become feasible. I'll stop from here and give you an example. Fracking, for instance, was long deemed too expensive and not worth it. The amount of energy put in to get to natural gas and shale oil out just didn't make sense. But then gas became substantially more expensive. And all of a sudden people said, for every dollar we put in, we'll get two out. Okay, fracking makes sense now. The left hates fracking. The right likes fracking. What do? I'll tell you this. If the states separated, I believe it will be the blue states that will crumble and fall almost overnight. Then they would start fighting to steal from the red states. Why? Blue states may have intellectual property. They may have the hubs of media and communications and technology, but they don't have energy production and they don't like energy production. They try to ban energy production in many ways, and the red states would immediately open the door and allow all sorts of energy exploration, which in turn would mean red states would rapidly expand and grow with access to this energy, and they need only give it to themselves. Plus, they're more capitalist, decentralized, and they'd flourish. David goes on to say, it's interesting that those are the strongest objections to national divorce today seem to base their admittedly legitimate worry about those horrific split-up scenarios rather than make a principled Lincoln-esque argument about the insolubility of the Union. Of course, appeals to boomer patriotism still exist, but I'm not sure if that kind of thing gets very many people going anymore. I'll add too. Millennials are buying guns. Pro-gun sentiment is on the rise. People will be armed. This cannot go on forever. He goes on to say, we'll just scroll down, though, to get to the point of the article. He says, for more than a century, progressives have dedicated themselves to abolishing the legitimacy of federalism and the reconstituting of the federal government and the courts in order to make its application and practice all but impossible. Over time, as their fanaticism grew, the left's position hardened from the mere undesirability of local differences and state sovereignty to the illegitimacy, unjustness, and unfathomable evil of such an arrangement. In order to return to a time of relative public consensus on these things, one side must impose its will on the other. While Red America isn't really interested in imposing its will on Blue America, it's clear the reverse is emphatically not true. In a famous 1964 speech, Ronald Reagan said about the last century's Cold War, there's only one guaranteed way you can have peace, and you can have it in the next second: surrender. This might be the unstated solution proffered by mainstream right commentariat, but is this the best we can do? Because it's just over the horizon of what we can imagine from our vantage point. National divorce isn't at all an immediate action plan, or at least I don't see it as such. Rather, it is a rhetorical strategy to prepare the ground for crucial discussions about what comes next in America, as the country grows even more divided, bitter, and angry. More than anything else, it is a reminder for Red America to think about economic and cultural autonomy for itself and what it would take to get there. Autonomy for Red America is of crucial importance, regardless of the status of political or real separation. It is the ability for Americans to be self-sufficient from the financial, educational, and cultural institutions that are hostile to its beliefs and way of life, and make reconciliation increasingly impossible. I'll put it this way. I do not want it to happen. I do not want this country to fall apart. This is an amazing country. It's the best country. It really is. I've been to many countries. But it's happening. The border is broken. The federal government is broken. Biden is ruling by decree. There's violence in the streets, firebombing of political headquarters, mass rioting over political issues. Half the country says no. Half the country says no to the other half. How much longer can we last in this regard? You can sit back and act like it's not happening. And that's what people have been saying to me for years when I warned of this. And people said it was crazy. And still to this day, there are people saying it's crazy when it's literally happening. We have more and more examples. We have more and more polls. We are driving down the road in the same direction. At a certain point, it is time to recognize it is happening. Now we can stop it. But I don't know how. And I'm not sure that it's going to be easy. It may be nigh impossible, simply because this country is so divided. There are two distinct cultures that do not view each other as salvageable. The left says the right is a bunch of crackpot conspiracy theorists who can't be trusted, and the right says the same of the left. It doesn't matter who's right. They're saying it. I guess we can only sit back and wait because no one's going to make any moves until eventually it's too late. I'll tell you what I did. I moved to a red state. I've decided to, get more into homesteading, self-sufficiency. At the very least, it's good for the environment and it teaches personal responsibility. In the absolute worst case scenario, at least I'll have that going for me. I'll leave it there. Next segment will be tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all then.